So thanks everybody for coming to the webinar today. I'm Ben Gromicko from InterNACHI. This is John McKenna from InterNACHI, and we're going to talk about thermal imaging for home inspectors for a little bit this morning. Just wanted to tell you we had about 250 students register for the class from all over the world. I counted it this morning. We had 34 states in the United States. We also had a few from South Africa, Jordan, Alberta, New Zealand, Costa Rica, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Quebec. So thank you all for showing up today. That's really a good student body there. I'm glad you're all with us this morning. I'm going to stay off to the side while John teaches, and I'm going to look at the questions that you have for John. If you want to ask a question during his presentation, feel free. Even afterwards, use that little text box or chat box down at the bottom right corner there. And just some logistics. We're video recording this, so you could see it afterwards. And John's going to provide the slides for the class, so you don't have to write everything down. We'll have that on NACHI TV, so we'll send out an email to everybody. If you have to leave early because you scheduled a job in 20 minutes, no problem. We'll have it all video recorded for you with those slides. And feel free to ask questions. So I think that's it. That's the logistics. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the mic to John. Say hello to everybody.
Howdy. I'm from Texas. Okay, guys. We're going to cover some aspects of thermal imaging. And like Ben was saying, you can ask your questions, and we'll try to get to them at the end of the session that we're covering right now. On the first image that you see there, it says thermal imaging for home inspectors. And there's a web page there at infrared-certified.com. And it's got my email contact there, john@infrared-certified.com. And I wanted you to have that in case you want to contact me personally, or after looking at the website, you see some things that, sparks a question and you want to have communication with me after today's session. Let's go to the next slide here. There's a lot of different questions that come up about the types of training and certifications that are out there. And we're going to try to cover some of that briefly. In the United States, there's no law that requires you to be certified or licensed to use an infrared camera. A lot of people get that confused and think that you have to have some type of legal fulfillment of a certification or a license, but it's just like using a moisture meter. You can utilize a moisture meter just like other electric tools of measurement. So infrared camera can be utilized even without any certification or any licensing whatsoever in the United States. Now, I understand there's one place in Canada that they recently started requiring people to have a certain level of education to use thermal imaging. So I haven't got the full picture on that yet. So I don't want to comment on what's going on in Canada in regards to that requirement. But let's go over the definition of the word certification, because that question comes up so often. Certification simply means that a school certifies that you have reached a certain level of education or training. A license is when the government issues permission for you to practice a certain profession or skill within its jurisdiction. So certification, people that they hear the question about certification quite often because they hear the terminology level 1, level 2, and level 3 certification, and they feel like there must be some kind of a legal requirement when they hear the word certification. But it just simply means a school certifies you've reached a certain level of education or training. Let's go to the next slide there. Um, InterNACHI has created a trademark educational designation that's called Infrared Certified, so that when you complete the process laid out by InterNACHI, you can tell your clients and advertise on your website and brochure that you are indeed infrared certified. And basically, what we've done is we've taken the content of a level one class and we've modified it to it is in the application of what home inspectors would use on a daily basis, home inspections and light commercial. So that was our goal, is to take the same basic principles of a level one class and get it down to the point that we cover just the important points that home inspectors would use on a daily basis and people that do light commercial. And we have a website there, nachi.org/IR. And you can utilize that website if you would like to see the infrared certification process that InterNACHI has set up. Um, our certification class itself, again, is at our main website, infrared-certified.com. And I'm your teacher, John McKenna. I spent 25 years in construction and going on 10 years in thermography. I was a licensed home inspector in Texas for 15 years and got into thermal imaging back in about 2007. So infrared thermography has a wide application of a variety of different uses, and we won't have time in today's brief session together to cover all the applications and different ways that thermal imaging can be used. So we're going to cover some of the main highlights so that you that are getting into the thermal imaging for the first time get a idea of what avenues can be opened up with different applications. And we're going to also talk about different income streams. So there'll be scientific definitions and principles, building science principles, liability issues, and also talking about the application process. And so it's going to be a lot of stuff coming at you pretty fast. You can see from this picture right here on the slide that's on your screen that there's a variety of different application processes. And let's go to the next slide there. The question often comes up, what are the classes that are called level one, level two, and level three? To make this a real brief history lesson, the terminologies came from around 1992 in the ASNT, which is the American Society of Non-Destructive Testing, set forth the outlines and conditions for different classes in thermography. And these different levels and teachings of thermography were given a title of level one, level two, and level three. And basically, what we've done at InterNACHI is take the basic principles from a level one class and put it into our thermal imaging class that I teach, along with some construction classes, trying to prepare home inspectors to do building thermography. Um, the average home inspector is not normally going to have to get into the aspects of a level two or level three training unless they plan on getting into some more intense commercial industrial applications, especially in the electrical field. And I'll cover some of that as we go along. Let's go to the next slide here. And there's a link there on the page that you see in front of you now, detailing the history of thermography. So that's an interesting several pages to read regarding the history of thermography if you'd like to learn more about its original discovery back in 1800 and how it's developed over the years. The use of thermography in the building systems really didn't get started in the building trades until the early 2000s. By 2005, it was starting to pick up speed. Cameras were still relatively expensive back then. I think back in 2007, by the time I lost time at work going to get my training for 4 days, bought an infrared camera, and then paid for the teaching class itself. It cost me basically about $13,000 to get started. So it was quite an investment to get started, even back around 2007 as building thermography began to pick up more popularity. Let's go to the next one there, and you can see an old infrared camera back from 1969 called the Thermovision 661. I'm just trying to touch base on a little brief history of thermography. That type of camera right there was sitting on a tripod and weighed 55 pounds. And then on the right side, you can see the image of today's cell phone attachment of the FLIR 1, and it just weighs, such a tiny amount right now. So it's amazing how the cameras used to be big and bulky, and now we've got them down to the size that they can attach to a cell phone. So technology has really developed thermal imaging cameras. Let's go to the next slide there. Here you see a picture of a gentleman that was using one of the first portable infrared cameras that were handheld. And that little thing you see strapped to his chest, that box, that's actually the viewer screen where he can view what the camera is actually seeing through the lens of the thermal imaging cameras. He points in different directions. The camera, even back then in 1972, cost over $40,000, had like $7,000 to $8,000 worth of perishable parts that had to continually be maintained if you used it on a regular basis. And the inflation factor of $40,000 plus the maintenance costs would run into about $250,000 if you were to buy the same camera at the same price in today's money. So that was quite expensive back in 1972. So again, the average home inspector was not just running out and spending that kind of money on buying a thermal imaging camera for home inspections. And home inspections back then were in their infancy. It was not as common as you see today. Let's go to the next image there. And I highly recommend that everybody get training before you go out and buy a camera. And I know that's one of the main questions that people have all the time is what type of camera do I need for a building inspection? And there's two basic avenues that people can fall into as far as how they plan on using the thermal imaging camera as a home inspector. One is a casual use and the other is professional level. Sometimes people just want an infrared camera that they can keep in their toolbox, use it to verify different things, just pull it out when they see something that they feel is important and they wish they had an infrared camera in the toolbox to verify something. And this is what I call more of a casual use. And in that type of plan, if a person wants to utilize an infrared camera, some of your low resolution cameras, um, can indeed work if you're just getting started in thermal imaging. Now, as soon as you go to the professional level and you tell your clients that you're a professional thermographer, their expectation level goes way, way up. And they want you to have a camera that is both dependable and reliable, giving results that are something that they can really go to the bank with. So I suggest that if you plan on going to professional level with the infrared thermography, is that you get good training and that you buy a professional level camera. Uh, the school called Infraspection and the energy audit organization called ResNet have both tried to write standards of practice for thermal imaging and to clarify what inspectors would need for thermal imaging within a building. And both of those organizations came to a conclusion that at a professional level, that they both recommend that you go with a 120 by 120 resolution camera and that the MK rating be no more than 100 MK. Now, I really don't have time in this session to explain all the specifications, but what we like to do in our classes is to go over the specifications so that each student has a better grasp of what they're getting into. So this is again why I say it's so much better to take training before you just jump out and buy a professional level camera. Uh, Internachi through Inspector Outlet offers some incredible low prices on infrared cameras. I personally don't sell cameras, but they've offered the students that take our class some incredible discounts on thermal imaging cameras. So you can contact me by email if you'd like a quote or even a complete price list on some of the available discounts on a variety of thermal imaging cameras. And we've got a link there for you to consider the standards of practice that were written by Infraspection. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now, I want to get into some of the principles and basic concepts of thermal imaging. And this picture here, you can see two cups, and one is cold water on the left and hot water on the right. And the reason why I like to start out with this photograph is to drive home the fact that this may be the most important picture or thermal image that you ever see, because it really shows how thermal imaging can play tricks depending on your environment. And in this situation, the set of steps right there that the cups of water are sitting on, the steps in the thermal imaging on the right have actually disappeared. You can't really see the distinguishing outline of one step to the next step. And the reason why that's so important for you to understand is that the infrared camera needs to see temperature difference in order to bring out details on your viewer screen or to produce a thermal imaging picture for your report. And so I like to ask the question, if a poor delta T, which by definition that means a lack of temperature difference, can make a complete set of steps disappear, how much more could a little tiny water spot that maybe is hidden behind the wall, maybe no bigger than the size of a quarter, how much more could a poor delta T environment cause a little moisture spot that's only maybe a couple inches wide, actually make that disappear as well? You can see from the image on the right, a poor delta T environment can make an entire set of steps disappear. See, so this is kind of what a person getting into thermal imaging needs to realize, that sometimes they can be thermally blind and not even understand that their camera may not see certain things. And to know the difference and know how to draw out details, not just surface details, but the majority of what we look for is thermographers in a building inspection, is we're going through the difficult process of trying to bring out subsurface temperatures of anomalies, for example, like moisture that may be behind the wallboard or behind the ceiling material. And how do you draw that to the surface so that you can see it with the infrared camera? And there are methods to do this. There's tricks of the trade. There's things to watch out for. And once this enhancement or this manipulation of the environment can be done, it can increase the ability of your infrared camera to find different variety of defects by as much as 1,000%. uh, it would not be a good feeling to go through a building inspection and you're thermally blind. Your camera just does not see certain things, and you're not aware of it. See, and that's what we take time to cover in our class is some of the different aspects and variety of ways that you can bring subsurface temperatures to the surface so that your camera can see it, and then you can begin the verification process and trying to discern what is it that you've actually found below the surface with your infrared camera. And you can see on the picture there, the color palette takes the images of things that are cool and colder temperatures, and you see the darker blues and blacks. And in this color palette, the warmer temperatures has, you know, been illustrated in the image as the yellows and whites and the oranges and the brighter colors. So with the thermal imaging camera, there's a variety of different color palettes, and we talk about that in our class and how you can utilize those different color palettes for different purposes. Okay, let's go to the next image here. We spend time discussing, and again, today we're just briefly covering some highlights of some of these concepts. Three basic functions of thermal imaging frequencies and how they respond to different materials. You have emittance, or many times called emissivity. You have reflection, sometimes called reflectivity, and then you have transmittance. Emittance is how some materials will absorb infrared frequencies, and they actually go into the atoms that make up the material itself, and then immediately, without any delay, it radiates it back out. And this absorption and emittance coming back out happens in different ratios. Not all materials radiated back out at the exact same ratio. So this can cause your camera to see different materials with apparently different temperatures, different, you know, in your color palettes, different lighter and darker colors. And many times the actual temperature of the material itself hasn't changed. It's the ratio of emissivity coming out of the atoms in the material. Then we talk about reflectivity and how deceitful reflectivity can be. For example, metal that is highly polished and smooth can many times reflect the environment around it. And so it gives you an appearance on your infrared viewer screen in your camera. And it can also affect how you see temperature, but it's deceitful. It's a reflected thermal frequencies, and you learn not to rely on those. An interesting phenomenon is that you can point your thermal imaging camera at an electrical panel, and you can have all type of shiny metallic objects in there, like lug nuts and screws that are holding the wires in place. And the infrared camera will actually pick up the reflection of you, the thermographer, and your body heat reflecting off of the surface of these different screws in the electrical panel. And as you move to the left and move to the right, the reflection is picked up, and then it's gone, and then it picks it up again, and then it's gone. And so when you're looking at the electrical panel, sometimes it's blinking like a Christmas tree. So it's quite interesting. You see the reflective nature of some infrared frequencies bouncing off of the shiny screw heads and a electrical panel. You learn that those types of uh, shiny metallic surfaces um, can be other types of surfaces as well, but concentrating right now on metal. Those shiny metallic surfaces are giving you an image and also a temperature reading that can be influenced by the environment around you. And so it's deceitful. It's not a true and trusted thermal image like emissivity that's actually coming out of the atoms itself. So we try to talk about that in the class, how that you can, be aware of this and be careful what conclusions you come to. um, I've actually seen teapots that were being warmed on the stove, and shiny metal teapot, and it was so hot if you were to touch it with your fingers, it would actually be very hot to the touch, and but in the image itself, it's actually something that looks cool because it's picking up on the environment around it. Now, in the case of transmittance, you see the third factor there. Transmittance is the aspect that's very rare that thermal imaging frequencies can pass through materials. And you almost never run into that in a building inspection. I'll give you a couple examples of where it is true, and you can see it. Is number one, the lens of your camera is not made of glass because infrared frequencies cannot pass through glass, but the lenses are made of a mineral called germanium, which allows transmission or the passing through of infrared frequencies. Another material that allows transmission is a black plastic bag from Walmart, or the same kind of plastic bag that they use at the dry cleaners to put over your clothing after it's been through the dry cleaning process. You can put your hand inside of a black plastic bag, and you can no longer see your hand with your eyes, but with the infrared camera, it's still quite clear that you can pick up on and actually see the image of your hand right through the black plastic. A little trick to the trade that you learn from this is that you can take a bag from the dry cleaning company and actually wrap your infrared camera with it, so that if you're outside in a wet, misty day, a lot of high humidity and moisture in the air, and you don't want to damage your thermal imaging camera, you can wrap your camera with that plastic from the dry cleaning company, and you can still get very, very clear images through the lens of your camera because that plastic is allowing transmittance to pass through the plastic, and you can still take thermal imaging photographs. Um, so that's an interesting uh, phenomenon, and a good tool to add to your tool bag as far as a trick to the trade, how to make it in thermal imaging on a very wet and moist day. All right, let's go to the next slide there. Here we've broken down some of the aspects of what goes into the thermal imaging produced by your camera. You can see on the far right over there that there is a display of the viewer screen that the thermographer would be looking at, with a variety of colors depending on what color palette you choose. And for that to be produced in high quality, it starts all the way back at the other end where infrared frequencies have to pass through the lens of the camera. Now, years ago, when they used to manufacture camera lenses only for professional level thermographers, there wasn't much to worry about because the lenses were made of high quality germanium, as we talked about earlier. And nowadays, as a lot of your lower resolution cameras have been manufactured for more of a casual use, the lenses have been mingled with other ingredients in the germanium. And so what happens is there's less quality and clarity of the image in the poor quality lenses. So a lot of people are not even aware of that. And the lenses of an infrared camera are extremely expensive. So this is one of the big cost saving factors that manufacturers have started doing for some of your low resolution cameras. Um, Also, the title up there, you see at the top of the page the word detector. Um, there is a cluster of detectors or sensors that actually picks up the infrared frequency and converts it into an electronic signal that can go into the processor of your camera. It used to be years ago that the detectors were manufactured only at a professional level because that was the only people that were buying infrared cameras. Now, as you get low resolution cameras, more and more of these detectors, sometimes called sensors, of a they're of a lower quality. There's quite a variety of different low quality detectors out there. And the actual number of detectors is contained in that number we talked about earlier. Remember when we said the minimum level for a uh, professional level thermal imaging camera was 120 by 120. That's actually the actual number of the cluster of detectors, which is sometimes called the detector array. And as you increase the number of detectors, you're actually increasing the sensitivity of the camera to pick up on the infrared frequencies that are coming through the lens. As the detectors have been manufactured, there is a slight space, tiny, tiny little space measured in microns between each one of the detectors. And this is the MK factor that we brought up earlier. And that tiny little space has to be within certain restrictions to be considered a professional level infrared camera. Once you get too far in apart in the detector array or variety of different detectors all clustered together, when each one of them is a little too far apart, you're starting to increase what I call the fuzzy factor. So that's why they set a minimum standard on the MK rating, which would be no more than 100 MK. The amplification process, see down there at the bottom, um, your signal passes through an amplifier and it's processing now. It's taking the electronic signal from the detectors and it's processing this. This processor has to be at a certain speed and bandwidth in order to maintain the quality of the final image you see on your camera display screen on the far right. If this processor slows down or distorts any of the electronic signals that come through there, the end result of what you get may look like a thermal image, but it's several levels of distortion, or that's why you look at some of the lower resolution cameras and you see blobs of information instead of fine details. The cameras that produced the finer details had to go through high quality lens, high quality detectors, without the MK factor being too far apart in how it was manufactured. And the final processing has to maintain a certain bandwidth and speed in order for you to get on your display screen the final image at the end. So this is a very brief overview. I don't want to, spend too much time talking about how they uh, create the cameras and the components and parts in the cameras. Uh, but I wanted to say enough about it so that people would say, I would like to learn more about how cameras are made and learn more about the specifications and what difference they mean, so that I know, based on my plans and future plans, on what type of infrared camera I need for my express purposes. Let's go to the next image. Okay, here we have a moisture spot on the ceiling. And it would be wonderful if every time you found moisture on the ceiling, it was so dark and very visible and easy to find. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the moisture is hidden below the surface, and there's ways to manipulate your environment, which is called the manipulation of the delta T environment within the building, trying to draw out subsurface temperatures so that your camera can see it. Um, if you're in a building where you've got the working HVAC system, the heater can be turned on, and this is one way of heating up the surface around the moisture area, and then the moisture spot many times would be cooler, so it looks like a darker or cooler image on your infrared viewer screen in your final image or picture that you put in your report. Now, depending on how much moisture is there, it may have just rained 3 days ago. It may have rained and leaked into that area 7 to 10 days ago. The type of infrared camera that you buy and the level of sensitivity that it has will determine whether or not you can still pick up the images of hidden moisture uh, within a 3 day window or within 7 to 10 days. So you need to know the difference so that you can prepare yourself adequately. When you turn on the air conditioner in the HVAC system, the cold spot or the moisture goes through evaporation because of the air conditioning function of evaporation. And it also causes it to turn into a darker, cooler area. We know that evaporation invokes a rapid cooling in the area where there's moisture present. And so sometimes you can turn on the air conditioner, and that's exactly what you need to enhance the delta T. Again, the word delta T means temperature difference, so that your camera now has the ability to pick up on this detail of where that may be located. Um, just a side note, I've walked into some buildings where there was no air conditioning or heater to turn on. For example, if the power was turned off to the building and there was no way to turn on the HVAC system. And so technically, I had no way to manipulate the indoor building environment. And but for some reason, I noticed on some days that the moisture spots that are normally hidden would stand out like a neon sign, all very, very visible. And the reason why that happens on some days is the humidity levels in the air can encourage or discourage evaporation just naturally. So if you happen to get there and the air is dry, then that's going to encourage evaporation. And all of a sudden, these hidden moisture spots show up because there's so much natural evaporation taking place inside of a building. But many times you show up and there's enough humidity in the air where it discourages evaporation. And so you don't get this cooling effect, or the manifestation of this cooler moisture spot doesn't show up. Now, this is a, brief, very brief discussion on manipulating the delta T environment within the building envelope. When you go outside, Now you're talking about a different ball game altogether, because you've got to correspond your efforts in thermal imaging with what Mother Nature throws at you. So let's go to the next slide. Uh, Mother Nature sometimes gives you a window in the morning where it's been cool from the night before. So in this case, this is what you're seeing here, is the moisture is being cooled off from the night before. And the beginning of the morning hours, um, the dry areas are being heated up, but the area that's moist behind the vinyl reveals itself. So this type of picture of the hidden moisture behind the vinyl siding could be revealed. Now, sometimes you've got to be careful, because the sunshine that comes up in the morning when the sun rises has a gentle influence of heating the surface of the siding, and it can be a benefit. But once the sunshine gets above the horizon so far, it's unfiltered by the atmosphere as much. When it first rises, the atmosphere causes that ultraviolet energy to come across and heat the surface of the building very gently. Many of the ultraviolet energy rays and frequencies have been blocked out because it's so close to the horizon. As it gets a little higher, it's unfiltered and it becomes more intense. So now the siding, once it's receiving unfiltered high intensity sunlight, can do something what's called solar loading. The siding is actually absorbing the influence of the ultraviolet heat from the sunshine, and it becomes your enemy. So it starts masking subsurface temperatures, and it's no longer a benefit, but it actually becomes so intense, it's actually blocking out any subsurface revelations on where hidden moisture, like this example, it starts blocking that out. So it becomes more and more difficult to find it. In fact, you get to a certain point that you're not going to see any subsurface temperatures, because the influence of the sunshine is masking anything that's below the surface. So we get into a variety of different cladding systems. You have stucco, ephes, different type of wood products, hardy plank, vinyl, and each one of those variety of different cladding and siding systems have their own unique little aspects when dealing with thermal imaging and things to work out and process for you to get the maximum revelation of subsurface temperatures, because that's the challenge of every building thermographer, is finding the defects that are below the surface. If we can just walk up to the surface of the wall and there's moisture on the outside just showing up on the surface, you don't even really need a camera for that. Okay. The challenge that we face as building thermographers is finding the hidden or subsurface temperature measurements or anomalies, so that we can include this in our report. And then we go through the verification process of what is it that we have found. Now, so far, I concentrate a lot on moisture detection. There's, like I said earlier in the presentation, there's a wide variety of different types of applications. I know of one termite inspector that actually points his infrared camera at the target of finding uh, termite colonies. Okay. And he's taken to a certain method where he can point a portable heater at a certain target area, and he can allow that heat to begin to absorb into the wallboard. And as it goes in, it opens up like a 20-second, 30-second window where he can actually photograph with the infrared camera the location of termite colonies. And then as the heat goes deeper into the material and the termite colonies absorb that energy, they begin to disappear. So he's learned to manipulate an environment, what we call manipulating the delta T environment, to open up like a 20 or 30-second window to photograph with the infrared camera the location of termite colonies. So you can take that one example and apply that to other types of materials and cladding systems and things that you can and cannot do both inside and outside the building. And you can see how the whole process can get quite sophisticated if you want to rise to the level of getting maximum results from your thermal imaging camera and be respected and utilize the camera at a professional level. Let's go to the next picture here. Now here's a commercial flat roof. And when you get into outside scans of whether siding or commercial flat roofs, there's a wide variety of influences that Mother Nature throws at you. You've got the influence of humidity, and I touched on that. You've got the influence of sunlight, and we kind of touched on that. You've also got factors regarding wind, and wind velocity when it reaches a certain point can become a hindrance whether or not those infrared frequencies can reach the lens of your camera. Distance, depending on what type of camera you use, what type of defects you're looking for, and your ability to understand what working distance can you actually work from. It's not really practical to make a plan that I'm going to buy a very, very low resolution camera for certain jobs that will require me to stay 18 inches away from the surface. Okay. Trying to scan the entire building envelope or moving on to commercial flat roof, and you're doing everything from 18 inches away, is not going to serve you well in your discovery process. Also, we discussed the factor of focusing your camera. There's different ways to manipulate your thermal imaging picture. Even after you get it into your computer, your software allows you to manipulate it to a certain degree, trying to draw out more details and enhancements. But there's one thing you can never go back and redo or manipulate inside your software that comes with the camera. Is focus is a one-time deal. So when you're out in the field, focus can be very, very important. And we try to talk about that. There is a variety of different income streams that can be made with thermal imaging. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But commercial flat roofs is something beyond a home inspection. But a lot of inspectors want to hear about and learn what can I do with the infrared camera during a home inspection, and what type of income streams can this lead into, and what are some of the steps I need to go through to prepare myself and pitfalls to avoid, and what will I need to learn during the learning curve to create these other income streams that may be beyond a add-on service of just a home inspection. And we try to cover some of those aspects in the class as well. Now, in this picture here, where the hidden moisture was found under a commercial flat roof, this is actually taken after the sun goes down, and it's not uncommon for thermographers on a commercial flat roof to wait as much as 2 hours, sometimes all the way to midnight, just depending on the delta T that Mother Nature throws at you. How much was the water heated up that's underneath the surface material, how much sunshine and the influence of the clouds, the transition from the daylight hours into the nighttime temperatures. There's several factors that can affect when and how intense your delta T window is when it finally opens up for you to see what can be seen. So it's a lengthy discussion, needless to say, and we're just touching base on some of this so that if you're anticipating you want to get into thermal imaging, you're starting to get a little feel that there's a variety of income streams that are out there with this. Go to the next slide. Here we're doing some thermal imaging of electrical panel. And many times the question comes up, how hot is too hot? And there's several factors that have to be considered. The load that's on a particular circuit, what is it operating? And when it reaches a certain threshold and you're in a certain ambient temperature, a certain environment. In this case, this is a panel that's located on the outside of a house, and it's already quite warm that day because it was out in the direct sunshine in the evening. Whereas an electrical scan inside the building in a more controlled, mild environment in the building envelope would be a different set of parameters and a threshold of when you say how hot is too hot. So we've discussed these numerical numbers with electrical engineers trying to arrive at a common sense rule of thumb that thermographers can use in a variety of different applications and different ambient temperatures so that you can make judgment calls. And it can be a moving target. So we need to, spend some time discussing that of what influences can cause that target temperature of how hot is too hot to be a variable there that needs to be understood. The electrical scanning with the thermal imaging camera is going to take you into a level of thermography and electrical analysis that perhaps everybody is not prepared for. And it's quite different than the old style visual inspection of an electrical scan. You still hold to the principle of a non-invasive inspection where you're not dismantling things, but you're seeing a whole lot more information in a lot more detail. And also you'll discover with thermal imaging that there is a wide variety of electrical type of defects that has nothing to do with a hot temperature. Sometimes it's the pattern, and the patterns have to be seen with a camera that has the ability to pick up enough details to identify the pattern. Case in point, look at this picture on the right. You can see where the little spot temperature bullseye is there on that one breaker. And look slightly above it, in between one breaker and the other breaker, you see an intense warm area or heat coming out between the breakers. Well, that's because the camera has enough sensitivity to pick up on this detail. Some of your low resolution cameras won't always pick up on finer details. This is an indication that the heat that is manifesting between those two breakers is actually coming from the back side of the connection point of the bus bar. Okay. And there's a variety of other type of thermal imaging pictures that we'll look at during our main class, that we analyze the different patterns that are not related to temperature. Okay. Now, some things are related to temperature and some things are just the pattern. Some things are a combination of the pattern and the temperature. And so we discuss those things in the class so that you can be prepared. You're going to see a lot more information about electrical and make judgment calls on a variety of different patterns and thresholds of temperature than you did before with just a normal visual inspection. All right, let's go to the next one here. Energy evaluations, moisture detection. one of the biggest demands in thermal imaging is an increasing demand by clientele for energy evaluations, and moisture detection is a growing field of demography. Um, so be aware of that as you develop your plans of getting into more thermal imaging. Let's go to the next picture. We also talk about in our class about reporting, composing your pictures to tell a story, verbiage to share the significant, and preparing your client, managing their expectation, and surprises that can pop up during the examination and evaluation process because you're revealing like the tip of the iceberg. The next picture is a picture of Superman with an infrared camera. That's what I used to look like before I got married. No, I'm just kidding. The liability issues, you don't want to present too many promises where you're making statements about what thermal imaging can do beyond the ability of the infrared camera. We talk about the difference between infrared technology and X-ray, the verification process, and other reporting and liability issues. The next page there, we talk about money and income streams that you can create through thermal imaging. The next image there, I want everyone to be aware that we have a class, on-site location class coming up in Boulder here at the InterNACHI headquarters on April 8th and 9th. So write that down, April 8th and 9th here at the InterNACHI school headquarters. And you can see a complete list of our thermal imaging classes. We teach some classes on location, and we also have an online class where you can do it completely online through podcast.
Well, thanks, John. We have a couple questions. You want to take just a couple questions?
Sure, we can do it.
So, James asks, does the inspector know which areas of the home in which to activate the thermal camera? Do you teach what actual parts of the home? Do you always like take a shot of the roof or the exterior or the electrical panel or the toilet? Do you have a list of like top 10 things to always look at?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And we do talk about your more sensitive areas that you're more apt to see a variety of different kinds of defects, especially, moisture detection. Uh, but eventually we end up scanning the entire building envelope as a bare minimum. And so we go over the highlights of what areas are more sensitive to moisture intrusion and what areas to really pay attention to.
Is there any benefit to using an infrared thermometer, not a camera, but an inexpensive held hand thermometer that uses infrared on like electrical panels to detect arcing and heat?
Well, obviously, there's a benefit. Electricians have been using thermometers for spot temperature check in isolated spots. Um, Infrared cameras were developed because it allows you to scan wide areas and cover much more territory than just a spot temperature check, for example, in the electrical system. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tool and it has a benefit. It's probably not near the same type of function or benefit as a thermal imaging scan.
Jacques asks, can you see mold with your infrared camera?
No, normally you see the moisture that can be related to the mold because wherever there's mold, there's usually moisture that has to be present for the mold to have its growth. But the camera is not designed in such a way. It sees temperature difference only. It sees different levels of energy. And so it's not intended to just see mold itself.
And there's a question. I'm a level 1 thermographer from through ITC. Does this help me through getting through the certification through InterNACHI through your course somehow?
No, if you're going through ITC and level one and you want to get to level two, um, as a licensed electrician who's going to do commercial, industrial, electrical systems, you would probably want the level two for that purpose. Uh, our class is taking the same basic principles of a level one class, and we've condensed it down and deal with the application process for home inspections and light commercial only.
Probably last question because we're at our time. So, John, do you consider thermal imaging in an everyday home inspection? Should home inspectors, certified home inspectors, start using infrared in their normal home inspection service?
Well, yes, I recommend it all the time with every home inspection. I would have clients ask me quite often, um, can we not do the thermal imaging so I can save some money? So I would respond by saying, well, if there's hidden mold inside your walls, do you think that's important information to include in your inspection report? And they'd say, oh, yes, that's critically important. And then I would always say, well, why do you want me to leave the thermal imaging camera at home? And that's the very tool I need to find very critical information that you say is very important. What you don't realize is that you're wanting to save a nickel at the risk of losing a dollar. So many times when I would explain it like that, they would go, well, let's do the thermal imaging. It's very important.
Well, John, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it, brother.
Yeah.
Again, everybody, the slides are going to be available so you can write down and click the links, and you'll have all of the URLs, especially John's infrared-certified.com page, so you can register for his class that's online, and the live class at InterNACHI School as well is coming up. So thanks again, John. I really appreciate it. Bye, everybody. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you, guys.